Okay, our next presenter is Kelvin Spiller, Leadership Thinking Australia, and one of the characteristics of local government in the last 5 or 10 years has been the massive turnover of CEOs across the sector. In some states it's been 30 or 40% over the last 2 or 3 years, and very hard to have stability when you have that sort of turnover of chief executives. So Kelvin Spiller has been in the local government sector for a long time, and part of the process for this event we thought we'd try and have a couple of people who are legends of local government sort of tell us what their learnings have been and their insights about the journey to date. Kelvin has been the CEO of 6 organisations. I think that's a typo because he just was appointed as the interim CEO for Geelong Council within the last 48 hours. So I think that should be 7 organisations, including 5 councils in 2 states, and has also been on some 30 government, community and business boards in 3 states. So a very, very broad spectrum of experience, and also has been running a business in terms of mentoring and coaching of council CEOs in the last few years as well. So to give you his insights about his journey to date in the local government sector, please welcome Kelvin Spiller.
Thanks very much, John, for the introduction. I'm not sure about the legend bit, but it's a hard one. This morning by the Geelong Advertiser I was referred to as a veteran operative, and I didn't like that either, so... Throughout my career, which includes a number of CEO roles both in and outside of local government and a number of different community, business and government boards in a number of states, I've gained a number of insights and lessons over the years, and some of the lessons and insights were gained at the time and others became obvious to me a few years later. Whilst there's no 2 councils are the same, there are a lot of common themes, of course, in relation to those councils. So today, in the short time that we have together, I'd like to share some of these with you. We heard this morning from the first speaker that there are major changes are sweeping the world, and just as the world has changed, of course, at the beginning of my career, so has the role for councils, councillors and mayors, and staff roles have changed significantly because of the impact of technology, particularly in the last 20 years. If you're slow to recognise change when it's happening, you'll be left behind, and certainly you'll be living in a time that no longer exists. So CEOs need to continuously look at new ways of doing things and working smarter, not just harder, faster, longer and quicker. And it is really an interconnected world today with community, government and business involvement at the speed of thought. And incidentally, that was the title of a book written by Bill Gates about 20 years ago. I've observed many councils are now transitioning their business models into a more engaging one to meet the needs of the more well-informed, educated and diverse communities. Also, the communities have a voice that's now heard immediately and of course loudly on social media. I witnessed the impact of this social media when I was acting CEO about 18 months ago at the rural city of Wangaratta there in the lead up to the federal election in the electorate of Indigo. Because of the turmoil in relation to what was happening at the council at the time, it seemed that everybody in the district was on social, or had a voice on social media. So we certainly require better systems for engaging local communities, and of course we've heard this morning about the City of Melbourne's The People's Panel, which is going gangbusters as I understand it. Now, I've got to point this in that far corner, I'm told. Now, you cannot talk about changes over the last 20 years, of course, without mentioning the amalgamation of the Victorian councils in 1994 from 210 back to 78. In 1997, South Australia councils, 119 councils were reduced back to 69. In Queensland in 2012, 150 councils were reduced back to 73. In Sydney at the moment, there's talk about reduction of 40 metropolitan councils back to 10. In Western Australia, I understand there's something on the agenda tomorrow about this, but Western Australia last year started legislating to amalgamate 31 councils around the Perth area down to 16, and then earlier this year the program was cancelled. And then in the Tasmanian state government elections late last year, there was a lot of talk about that the end result in Tasmania might be a reduction from 29 councils down to maybe 3 regional councils. So I'm fortunate that I've had a number of amalgamation and de-amalgamation experiences in different councils and different circumstances. I was involved as a CEO at the City of Preston and CEO at the City of Darebin back in '94. I've also been involved in amalgamations in Queensland as chair of the Queensland Local Government Grants Commission, where we had to sort out a number of disputes between a number of different councils. Also involved with the amalgamation of the All Connects Water Board, which amalgamated the Gold Coast Water Board, the Logan Water Board and the Redland Council Water Board, which took us about 12 months to do, and then there was another political decision made and we spent the next 12 months de-amalgamating them back to those 3 councils. Ron Clark, who was the mayor of the Gold Coast Council at the time, got his wish, but I don't think he ever expected it to happen. Anyway, in relation to de-amalgamation as well, last year I was on the local government panel reporting to the Minister advising on how to de-amalgamate the suburb of Sunbury here in Melbourne out of the city of Hume. So I guess I've been asked many times 2 questions. Does it work? And the answer is, it depends. It depends on the degree and willingness of the newly formed council and the community to support it. And are there any savings to be made? Well, yes, there are. However, once again, it relies on the willingness of the administration and the council and the decisions that are made. To effectively engage staff, councils, governments and the wider community, a CEO needs to have a set of leadership tools. It's one thing to know what to do in relation to the position, but to be able to effectively engage, you need to be able to lead and learn. And my insight into leadership is that as a CEO, you can best position yourself by acquiring what I call the 3 synergistic skills or competencies. The first one is technical and managerial skills. The second one is personal development and self-mastery. And the third one is social and emotional intelligence skills. See if I can get this right. In my experience, a person's social and emotional intelligence skills are really the game changer in relation to the professional and personal development that keeps it all together for a CEO or executive manager. So with a higher level of social and emotional intelligence, you are able to better listen with empathy, positively engage with people, communicate more effectively, influence, persuade and build rapport, understand what motivates you and what motivates other people, and understand your own emotions and the emotions of other people. Yet it's this area of social and emotional intelligence that in some councils gets the least amount of attention in the HR and organisation development strategies. In the CEO and other executive roles I've had over the years, and also as chair of a CEO support group called the Executive Connection in Brisbane, I've had a series of insights, and I guess the older I've got, the more I've learnt, which is probably the same for all of us. One of my insights was that about 20 years ago, I was told that when someone said to me that you learn and grow by the people you meet and the books you read. Of course, that would equate to the new information that we have access to today. But since then, I've reflected on this statement many times. And there's no shortage of information available. Just for interest, if you Google, excuse me, If you Google leadership, leadership development, or team leadership, you'll come up with just over 1 billion references. You'll come up with another just under 1 billion references if you Google team skills. And there's 150,000 books that you can purchase on Amazon on leadership. And that's not getting into all the, the side topics that are directly related to leadership. Yet you'd be surprised by how many CEOs and executive managers that I've come across that say they don't have the time or they don't make sufficient time to do enough reading in relation to leadership. And I've got to say that their personal skill set is less as a result of not exposing themselves to either new or old information. In the year 2000, I attended a school reunion of the Geelong College here in Melbourne, and the principal of the day, Paul Sheehan, who some of you will know into cricket, opened the evening by saying, by the year 2010, 10 years from now, 90% of all we know will be learned between now and then. Now, I thought at the time that this was a pretty big call, yet with all the changes in technology and access to information in the past 15 years, I've got to say that, in terms of my own personal learning, it's certainly been, if it hasn't been 90%, it's certainly been very, very significant. So from my experience, professional and personal learning has been a lifetime occurrence, and you continue to learn, of course, academically. You learn by managing processes, learning about leadership, having experiences, and learning to be able to be better at influencing people. And when you get your first job as a local government CEO, well, that's when your learning starts. And I recall one of the councillors many years ago at the then Shire of Bannockburn, which is now part of Golden Plains, said to me, "Kelvin, you're lucky having got your qualifications and learning before being appointed to this Shire Secretary position. And you're lucky having staff to delegate to, because as a farmer, I need to know how everything works on my farm, and there's a lot of pressure on me to keep up with the continual mechanical changes of everything." Of course, he was wrong about my learning. I feel as though I've never stopped learning, being the perennial student. Also, when a CEO invests in their staff, not just in themselves, but in their staff as well, to be the best they can be, the organisation, the council and the community are definitely the winners. I've learned an enormous amount over the years from many people that I've met, worked for, or whom I've worked with. And not only have I learnt what to do, I've also learnt what not to do, which is just as important. My first experience of this was early in my career when one of my bosses here in the Geelong region treated all staff very, very poorly. He couldn't motivate unless it was to intimidate, and he was certainly not inspiring and had no work relationship skills. He's passed away now, but I've got to say here I am over 30 years later and I distinctly remember him. So there's some lessons there. I've noticed that sometimes when a person is appointed as a CEO that their ego can kick in. But the reality is that with your knowledge consists of only what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. So when we talk about knowledge, it's important to remember that there's more to learning and growing than just gathering information and getting formal qualifications. And although local government is unique in many ways, I've also found that the skills learned in local government are transferable into other service sectors like water, electricity, not-for-profits, state and federal government, and membership-based organisations like the RACV, the NRMA, etc., and a range of private sector businesses. And my friend John Walker, who's in the audience today, he's a speaker tomorrow. John's a classic example that he's the CEO of the Richmond Valley Council at the moment, but he's been in and out of local government, so he'll be interesting to listen to in relation to that. In reality, all CEOs and aspiring CEOs require leadership models. Often the art of leadership is learnt from those who go before us. So it's imperative that there are good leaders in place because they will be the role models for the next generation of leaders. I've come into contact with some CEOs and senior managers who think that there is power in holding on to information, and I've come to understand that it's actually the opposite. Once again, earlier in my career, one of my bosses in a council was reluctant to share his information and power with the management and the staff, and this made it difficult for us to get it right, as there was always some more information that we didn't know about when we thought that we had it all done and dusted. So he had to be the store of information, which meant his ego often stood in the way of relationship building. From my experience, silo thinking is good for storing grain or chemicals, but not for sharing corporate information. I've found that real influence comes through the sharing of knowledge across departments and cross-functional teams and larger groups. The sharing of knowledge reduces the impact of silo thinking, which exists in systemic proportions in most, if not all, organisations that I've come into contact with. I've observed many management and staff work in silos. Silo thinking is often poorly managed and is the case of so many lost opportunities. Organisations like local government councils are often breeding grounds for silo thinking, where specialised knowledge is built up in one department and there is a protecting the turf type mentality. I've found the key issue with silo thinking we're dealing with is, of course, human behaviour, which is often just the fundamental problem, and it's just another element that executives are required to manage. I never cease to be amazed, however, at the number of executives and middle managers who don't know some of the basic profile corporate information about their own organisation. And as a team, they often have hundreds of staff reporting to them. Silo thinking can be reduced and eliminated by creating opportunities for synergy between managers and staff. And one of my insight moments was when I really understood the power of synergy. As CEO for the Endeavour Foundation, a Queensland-wide provider of services to people with intellectual disability, the context is they had about 1,800 staff scattered over 150 locations from Cairns to the New South Wales border, 2,000 kilometres, and inland 900 kilometres to Mount Isa, Roma, Toowoomba, etc. They had deficit budgets for 9 years and they were on the brink of being put into administration. They had broken relationships with all the MPs and government departments around the state because of their disastrous financial situation. So many issues were raised from the 25 middle managers and supervisors when I wanted to meet with them on a regular basis in Brisbane, all in the one room at the one time to share information. Now you can imagine reasons like costs, transport, accommodation, were all raised. And not to mention that they were always too busy with workload, emails and overfull in baskets to be able to spare the time to come to Brisbane for 2 days every second month. And yet they were going down the gurgler financially, certainly in terms of strategic direction and with all their relationships. So I needed to be able to get them to understand why it was important for me to meet with them all together and not just me visiting them at their separate locations, and for all of us to share the same information that we had between us in relation to the organisation. I was able to share with them the exponential benefits achieved through Metcalfe's law, where 1 + 1 is 3. So if your value by yourself is 1 and you come to the table to consider a challenge or try and solve a problem, the value you bring is 1. If you bring a second person to the table and their value by themselves is 1, when you put the two people together, the value of the two people at the same table is not 1 + 1 = 2, it's actually 1 + 1 is 3. And the reason that it is 3 is that the person A will think of something and be prompted by something person B says that they wouldn't have thought of if they'd actually been there by themselves, but it's not necessarily new information. And then person B will then be prompted by information or a comment that might be raised by person A. So if you bring a third person in, once again, the exponential value is about 7. So Robert Metcalfe, a founder of 3Com in the US, and he was one of the founders of the Ethernet, and he was one of the people who assisted the evolution of the internet and the information superhighway. He came up with this theory, and his law is that the economic value of a network doesn't go up arithmetically, it goes up exponentially, and this, of course, can be defined as synergy. So I've found it to be a very useful framework in an organisational context, because as the more people from more departments are brought together and provided with information and knowledge about the business or the organisation or the cause, the number of connections and value of the entire network increases exponentially. Okay, now I'm going to focus on some insights I've had over the years as a result of some changes I've observed in the role of counsellor. A council chamber reflects, of course, the diversity we find in any local community. Candidates stand for election for a variety of reasons, including the one-issue candidate stirred up, about something they might disagree with. I know some of you might be surprised to find this hard to believe, but once elected, not all councillors get along. So it comes as no surprise that candidates have varying degrees of skills and interest in many areas in the community and in business. And many have not been part of a large organisation before, like a council that's driven by processes. So from my observation, I'm well aware that immediately following the election, for a new councillor, there's often a sudden feeling of being swamped with information or snowballed, swamped with rules, processes, timelines, legislations, meetings, and a multitude of people who all seem to be busy doing something. But what? At this point, a councillor's learning suddenly turns from a straight line into an exponential J-curve. Now, as John said before, I've been involved with over 30 community, regional government and many different business boards over the years, apart from my CEO roles. And what I've found is that even with directors who are appointed as opposed to councillors who are elected, the directors still come, excuse me, to the table with different points of view and personal agendas, which is no different to a local government candidate. So regardless of whether they are appointed or elected, some people have altruistic ideas to change things. Some people can be driven by hubris. Some people may have personal and political agendas and are determined to get their way by bullying if necessary. And as a CEO, you have to be able to work with the complexity of developing, building and maintaining a diversity of relationships, often with hundreds of people at the same time. And all this is done, of course, in an organisational context that's driven and regulated, as I said before, by legislation, by processes, by procedures, all with their own internal and often very public consequences. I've seen a councillor's role change from primarily a voluntary and part-time one to, in many instances, a paid full-time position in some states or paid equivalent of a director's sitting fee for other councils. I've found it essential for success of the council that the CEO clarifies with the mayor and councillors who does what, why and when, because there's often room for interpretation in relation to the legislation, and it's essential that the expectations of both be discussed and clarified. So running an organisation the size of a council, of course, is very complex nowadays. With all the services, there's usually about 120 different services on average that local governments provide. And there can be confusion about one another's role between the mayor, a councillor and the CEO. And this is definitely a major issue which just keeps getting repeated. I see it over and over again. So one of the councils I was at CEO at, immediately after one of the elections, one of the newly elected councillors, who was a former councillor and a power broker and an antagonist of the outgoing council and council staff, came to see me with a list of names of staff that he wanted sacked. Of course, there were the obligatory town planners' names. They were top of the list, of course, and anyone else who he had had a disagreement with over the previous 4 years while he was out in the community. Anyway, I explained that under my employment contract, which had been introduced since he was a councillor previously, that the performance of staff was my responsibility, and, councillor, we don't do things like that anymore. Now, I'm sure all this sounds a bit familiar to some of you. With more comprehensive and complex strategic planning processes, the day-to-day operations of a council, which are the responsibility of the CEO, are often easier to understand and come to grips with, and can seem more relevant in the moment, in the heat of the moment, than future direction strategies. Now, the role of mayor has also changed for some councils with a popularly elected mayor, which also impacts on the CEO's role. For 7 years, I reported directly to 3 popularly elected mayors as CEO of the Maroochy Council on the Sunshine Coast. And the council's level of success depended on the mix of the councillors in terms of their community focus and local community engagement. It depended on their personalities and personal leadership styles, and it depended on the willingness, basically, of everybody to work together. So as CEO working in this environment, my relationship and team building skills were obviously put to the test. It was a time of great learning for me. I guess I'm about to get some more experience with the new appointment at the City of Geelong, which also has a popularly elected mayor. So it's obvious to all of us there's a much higher level of public scrutiny of local government services, budgets, consultation, major projects, and the performance of elected officials, including the CEO and staff, now than ever before. The community is now far more vocal and passionate about perceptions of performance on service delivery. However, I've noticed that across our society generally, there's a lower level of respect between community members of someone holding a position of authority. So people in the main used to speak more respectfully to other people in the council chamber, and with this changing come issues that CEOs did not have to deal with in years gone by. So there are often issues between councillors, there are often issues between councillors and the CEO, between councillors, the CEO and the management and staff. And with all of this, we've seen the rise of the bully in organisations, which was one of the issues impacting the operation of the City of Wangaratta in 2013-14 when I was acting as CEO there for 8 months. Another council story, an embarrassing situation occurred once in a council chamber where a councillor was heckled with a lot of heated discussion from a visitor in the gallery. The end result was that I was CEO and I had to physically jump down off sort of the dais where I was sitting, and I had to physically restrain, stand between the councillor and the resident ducking punches at the same time and trying to keep them apart. But this incident did absolutely nothing to assist the council to be successful. I know as CEO you're required to live in a state of constant uncertainty about the issues and challenges that you're continually dealing with. And what does everybody want? They want certainty. So as a CEO, I've often seen my role as one of providing clarity of process to those around me rather than providing certainty in an uncertain environment. From my experience, people are more likely to go forward with you if they understand the reasons why. And that's even if they're not in complete agreement with you. So from my experience, a CEO will struggle in today's environment if there's a gap in the knowledge that they should have acquired or the knowledge that they should be clarifying and sharing with the council, the executive team and the organisation. So over the years I've experienced and I have seen things go horribly, horribly wrong if personality clashes are not managed properly, if the CEO is just in the wrong organisation at the wrong time and perhaps they didn't undertake the appropriate due diligence well enough to understand the environment and the culture of the council that they were going into. Things can go wrong also when the CEO does not establish the expectations on them right from the start with the key stakeholders. And things can go wrong if the CEO is office-bound and not visible around the organisation or the community. It is important that the CEO continuously engage a large range of key stakeholders on a multitude of issues. It seems to me that a CEO today is only as good as their last recommendation. A sound past track record doesn't necessarily mean as much today as it did in the past. And as a result of my experience, I'd advise a CEO not to become too emotionally attached to their recommendations. They shouldn't forget that they're making a recommendation to the council based on legal and professional or technical opinion, and that it's up to the democratically elected council to make the decision regardless of whether it's a political, business or community decision or value judgment. And I recognise also that a CEO can find it difficult to see a recommendation that they really believe in lost in a vote for a political or other reason. But there is a line, and I know that CEOs do step and have stepped many times in the past across that line, including myself. Well, what I know from personal experience is that what is printed in the media is not necessarily the reality. Matters are often sensationalised out of all proportion, and the local media seeks opinion from different viewpoints, basically to make a more interesting story. So some of you will have no doubt also experienced trial by media. Sometimes the facts just don't get in the way of a good story. So my message to a CEO is to make sure that they do the necessary homework on an issue and don't just wing it, because the consequences could be substantial and actually maybe fatal. I've learned as a CEO not to make the mistake of thinking that I'm either a staff member or a political leader. To be successful, a CEO has to work strategically and operationally on both sides of the fence. I understand that sometimes as a CEO, it can be easy for us to forget that we only have temporary custody of the position. And your role is to assist the Mayor and councillors to successfully deliver the necessary services to the community. And the role is to lead the staff and to manage the processes. I want to now refer to the quicker turnover of CEOs in local government. I'm aware CEOs, as John mentioned before, I'm aware that CEOs in local government are being turned over at a much higher rate than ever before, in some states more than others. Many CEOs are not getting their employment contracts renewed, especially in Queensland this past 3 years, where according to the local government department in Queensland, the figure is approaching 50% of the 73 CEOs in Queensland. And I guess you have to ask why. The LGAQ are currently studying the results of research with mayors and CEOs, which was completed this past month, but not yet released. So I'm personally aware, of course, that they're just in my dealings and having a big network right around Australia, that there are a number of CEOs struggling in all states. So this is a concern for the sector, and it's not the time to put our heads in the sand. I believe it is beholden on each generation of CEOs and the peak bodies to ensure that the new CEOs appointed are best equipped that they can be and have the ongoing support they need to be successful. So never before has it been as important for local government CEOs to be able to share their knowledge, improve their relationship skills, develop their social and emotional intelligence skills and competencies, and be positive and optimistic, which is one of the personality traits that will signal the level of engagement that they will have with people. Some reasons an incoming mayor and council may want to change the CEO can be about perception of performance on delivery of services to the community, personality differences, philosophical differences in approach, perception of different political points of view, not having ownership of the appointment, and not viewing the CEO as their own. Some people say a CEO's employment contract should be aligned to the election cycle to enable a new CEO to be selected by the new council. Now, I can see pros and cons with this system where the whole council is up for election and the CEO's position is also expiring, as you lose the history and perhaps there's no one really there to handle the transition. However, on the other hand, the incoming council will have ownership of the selection of their CEO if they are involved in the appointment. So I've come to the conclusion that whilst it doesn't guarantee success, every CEO needs to have access to a set of survival tools. Over the years, I've witnessed a number of CEOs that have got into trouble 6 to 12 months or 18 months after their appointment and have been personally struggling. And this has come about because they were not clear about what was needed to be put in place on their first day, the first week, the first month, and the first 100 days. And I now know that to improve your chance of success as a CEO when appointed, you should know what the sequence and focus of your attention needs to be. Because if certain things don't happen when they should, then you'll always be playing catch-up. And you, as I said, it doesn't guarantee success, but you will certainly have a much higher chance of success if you actually know the sequence and the focus that you need to have. I've found the first 100 days can be a bit of a honeymoon period for a new CEO, and a time to maximise the use of their time, energy and lessons. So this is the period of time when a new CEO can get the lay of the land, put their stamp on the job, get up to speed quickly by learning as much as they can, as quickly as they can, so that they can be, or give the most value to the community, council, mayor and staff, and to get value for money. Some of the primary causes that derail CEOs are the lack of a carefully thought through plan of action in advance, and getting overwhelmed with information and confusing priorities. And from my personal experience, the first 100 days for a new CEO are usually in a high stress environment. They come with, that period of time comes with multiple opportunities that can be grasped or lost for the organisation and the council. That period of time is crucial because you need to make sure that you read the play and don't make ill-informed decisions too quickly. But there usually is a lot of pressure on you to give advice and guidance about matters when there's not enough time perhaps to think things through properly. And the position of CEO can be a lonely one. So once again, from my observation, expectations are much higher now than ever before, and most troubles occur because people don't sit down and talk about the expectations. So there is an expectation as a CEO that you have all the answers. Of course you don't, it's impossible. And everybody needs to have someone to bounce ideas off during difficult times. Lifting performance and productivity of somebody and bringing about incremental change is one thing. However, my personal learning is coaching encourages conversations with enough edge to create and change insights and perspectives. And as a result of working for 4 years as chair of the Executive Connection Group 35 in Brisbane, which is coaching and mentoring support group for CEOs and in the private sector in a range of about 25 different businesses, I now realise the importance of coaching and mentoring for CEOs and executives, not just in the private sector, but also in all sectors. And I know how the right coach and mentor can fast track and stabilise a young CEO's career and prevent them from making some mistakes. From my experience, no matter how well prepared executives are, few can achieve and maintain their best performance on their own. Think of sporting teams. CEOs need to strategically and carefully manage their own performance. Now, you will have all heard the term walk the talk. Now, I've found that walking the talk and the impact of sharing knowledge as a CEO with the workforce at all levels is one of the most significant things a CEO can do. And it's the old adage that whilst people will listen to what you say, and that might be interesting, however, they're more influenced by what you do, which is crucial. And this reminds me of a story and an insight that I learned some 20 years ago when I was watching the TV news one night. There was a potential industrial dispute in relation to rostering hours at Qantas here at the Melbourne airport. And this was at a time when James Strong was CEO of Qantas. Some of you will recall that James Strong was the previous chair of Woolworths and Qantas only 18 months or so ago when he passed away unexpectedly. But the news report of 20 years ago gave me a significant insight and was one of those lessons I clearly remember today as I'm speaking to you. The message came for me right at the right time. Anyway, the news reporter asked one of the maintenance crews as they were leaving the car park, shoved the microphone in front of their face and said, "Are you going on strike?" Now, the response from the maintenance worker went something like this: "I don't support all James Strong's proposals, and I don't really like this proposal to change the rostering hours. However, what I know is he visits us here at the worksite every 3 months and updates us all with information and gives us a chance to grab him by the bow tie if we want to and ask him questions. And on his visit today, he actually stopped on his way through the crowd going into the meeting And he spent a minute or two talking to me, and he asked me how long I'd worked with Qantas and what did I think about the proposal to change the roster hours. So I told him. I gave him my view that with the little that I'd heard, I wasn't really in favour of it. However, I know enough about James Strong to understand that he is taking Qantas, the business and the organisation generally in the right direction. He answers our questions directly, even although what he tells us might not be what we really want to hear. And I know I'll get another chance to see him again in 3 months' time. So, mate, no, I'm not going on strike. As I said, this was a really powerful message for me at the time, and I couldn't help but think why more CEOs and executive managers don't walk the talk. From then on, wherever I've worked, I've put in place in my diary an ongoing program of walking the talk, and by visiting work sites and the far-flung office admin and depot buildings and the road gangs, to share information and to share information and to communicate key messages of the day. And I can say that from my personal experience, when staff or people disagree with what you are proposing, if you provide them with the reasons why and the background, treat them with respect, ask them for their views, maybe you have to agree and say to them, look, we'll just have to agree to disagree, and at the end of the day, I hear what you say, thanks very much, value your opinion, but I have to make the decision and, you know, we're going with this other decision. So, but what I've found is that so long as you do it at a personal level, people will follow you. And even when they might not be totally in agreement with you, but you do have to have a relationship with them. Another story I remember in relation to this was at a meeting at a depot at the Maroochy Council one afternoon. It was 38 degrees in the shade, I think, at the time, and someone yelled out something like, "You shiny pants from the top office wouldn't know what we do here at the depot." And I responded, "Well, look, I'll come and work with you for a day if you come and work for me if you come and work with me for a day." And after much jeering and skylarking from his mates, anyway, this guy reluctantly accepted my offer. But then I found out, of course, someone said, "You better ask him where he works," and then I did, and then I realised he worked on the tar truck. It was the middle of summer, and let me tell you, it's hot. So, as an aside though, my spending a day with him and his work gang, and him spending a day with me, assisted greatly in changing the culture and the them and us attitude of the indoor and the outdoor staff. And I put a program in place then for the next 12 months. Every month I'd go out and actually work with somebody somewhere, including the day on the beach with the lifeguards. That was really interesting. I thought that they had a very pleasurable job until, of course, there was unfortunately a bad accident with a young boy in the surf, and then I saw what these lifeguards did. It was unreal. And you know what? The management didn't supply them with enough phones, in those days, fax machines, basic equipment. You know, and yet someone just has to go out and be with them, spend a day with them, see what they do. You know, they know what's going on and they know what they need. So the insight for me in walking the talk, or as Alan Deutschman puts it in his book, Walk the Walk, is that if you put this into practice, like James Strong, and those were the days when Qantas had like 20,000 staff, you actually show what is really most important. You show who comes first, you show what comes first. You share the struggle and the risk, and you gain a first-hand view of the situation and the requirements. And every moment is an opportunity to teach, train and lead. And you take steps that every potential follower can follow. And you can become a leader even without a title, position or formal authority. And you inspire belief. So from my experience, the CEO-Mayor-Councillor relationship is the crucial element for the council as a whole to have any chance of being successful and achieving the corporate plan. If things go wrong with this relationship, then the CEO, Mayor and Council and the community will all be the losers, and the CEO's tenure will almost certainly be reduced. I've found that it's essential for a CEO at the time of appointment to have an initial conversation with the Mayor and the individual councillors in relation to about 3 or 4 different matters. One of them is the boundaries of their respective roles and responsibilities, the personal expectations of of you as CEO in relation to such matters as turnaround times for councillor inquiries, preferred methods of communicating with them, etc. And the third one is any issues or concerns that they may have about the organisation that you can then sort of start to look at and get on top of, and the priorities that they have for their areas for their term of office. I've also found that consciously and systematically managing up is a process that's not often given sufficient attention by the CEO and often overlooked at the middle management levels in organisations. And it's something that's not often talked about by management and staff. However, it's an important component of leadership. And part of the CEO's role is to work with the Mayor and the individual councillors to be successful. So to ensure my regular performance reviews didn't become personal, I've requested when I went to the Maroochy Council as CEO that an independent facilitator be engaged to undertake a professionally facilitated performance review, and this I believe should be legislated in all states. I know it's been talked about here in Victoria last year and it sits somewhere in the local government department at the moment. So my concluding remarks are that the interface between the elected councillors and the appointed staff and the interface of these two groups is, with the community is what makes local government unique. Unique with its many challenges, opportunities and experiences. And I've found to have the best chance of a council being successful, the Mayor and councillors, CEO, management and staff all need to have the opportunity to grow, learn and to reach their potential, and to have ongoing access to up-to-date information and the right people. I believe the outcomes of the sector could be improved if we all remind ourselves that we're working towards a common goal and that we're prepared to learn the lessons and insights from the past. If all councillors, the CEO and staff invest in their own education and learning and professional and personal development, whilst at the same time being open to the opportunities and learnings of the future. Today I can say my life has been enriched significantly with the experiences that I've had in local government. And it's been enriched significantly by the insights and learnings that I've had, certainly by the challenges that I've faced, the books that I've read and the people that I've met, including my wife Beverly, who was a former councillor at the City of Wangaratta some 22 years ago, who spent quite a bit of time reminiscing with me in the preparation of this paper today. Thanks for your interest.
We might have time for one question if you want to ask one.
Thanks for that. Brian Oliver from the town of Victoria Park in WA. On Tuesday, we just appointed a new CEO, and I took some notes about you saying to make sure that the CEO is best equipped for success. I was just wondering, I know you sort of touched on some stuff there towards the end of your talk, but what we as elected members can do, because obviously there's benefit for us for the CEO to be successful, so maybe what some insight or advice is on that?
Yeah. Well, certainly, look, we don't have enough time to go into all the steps here today, but one of the first things that a new CEO needs to do is to meet with, obviously, the Mayor, probably in the first half day after their commencement. They need to meet with the executive team, certainly probably within the first half an hour of their commencement, so if it's at 9 o'clock, and they probably need to meet with a group of the senior executive team and the 20 or 25 middle managers, all in the one room at the one time within the first hour and a half. And they then need to, first of all, because there'll be a lot of uncertainty about what will happen, and I don't understand the circumstances of your council, but people do need to know that it will be business as usual, and you need to be able to say to them, look, I will be speaking to you all individually as the next 2 weeks go by to find out what are your issues and concerns. I want to understand what your priorities are, and I want to listen to what you have to say about the challenges and the priorities, and that also includes the individual councillors, because once again, what often happens, CEO comes in, they get swamped with emails, people all over them, they get dragged everywhere. and then never really get round to having individual meetings to identify, understand and ascertain that information from the Mayor, the councillors and the key managers. One other thing as CEO that I know happens is that whatever plan you've got, for a day or during the week will be pulled apart by some emergency or some crisis, and you always need to have 30 minutes in your diary for follow-up time, personal space that only you can move around. And so you need to say to your EA, you can move that half an hour around every day, but you can't get rid of it and you can't put anybody in it. That's for me. And that's the time then when the Mayor's got an issue or one of your individual councillors have an issue, you can address it. And you have to, and you've got a chance to do that, when the issue is hot, not a day later. And there's no point saying to the Mayor or a councillor, oh look, I've been really busy, I've been working really hard, because that's not the issue. The issue of concern is the one that is being given to you then. There's a number of things that certainly within the first week as CEO you'd need to clearly understand what the financial situation is, what the debt is, what the short-term plan, the long-term 5-year, 10-year plan is, and also the Auditor General's key ratios, where the council sits with that, and also any remarks that might have been made by the last audit or the last couple of audits, just to get a handle on everything. So that needs to be done in the first week. Maybe we can talk later. I can give you an idea on other things, but there are other things that you need to do in the first month, other things you need to do in the first 100 days, and as I said, if you don't do them, well then you'll always be playing catch up. Thank you.
Can we please thank Kelvin Spiller?